God spoke to me in a powerful vision. A vision intended to show us how He views sin in our lives. My vision began by entering a dark and dimly lit room. There was an old man with long white hair, wearing a white lab coat seated behind a desk. He did not move. He sat silently watching those who entered the room. He was in authority over the room and was responsible for its supervision, to maintain and create all that was within the room. He oversaw it, crafted it, and managed that area. While he did not interact with anyone who entered the room, it was clear that he was highly interested in everyone who entered. He simply stared, never taking his dark black eyes off me. I was uneasy, as the room was dark and dimly lit, with shadowy areas difficult to see. It was clear that the room had various items around it, some arranged on shelves and tables, and some at my feet sitting on the floor. As my attention was drawn to various appealing and colored items within the room, I noticed that they were all very dirty. In fact, the entire room was filthy. As I looked closer at both the room and the items within the room, it was clear that everything was covered with a filthy black tar. I was wearing a long white robe. I realized that I wanted to keep it clean and sought to avoid any of the filthy black sludge that was covering the room and its items from getting on my robe. As I spent more time in the room, I realized that there was a strong smell. The wretched odor of corruption and decay. Of the people who I entered the room with, all were almost immediately drawn to any number of colorful but dank beakers, flasks, and other items arranged on the tables and on the floor. Each of the items seemed to offer something of interest for those entering the room. Those who were drawn to items within the room did not seem to notice or care that the items were covered, to varying degrees, with this filthy black decay, nor did they seem concerned with the now almost sickening stench within the room. Others, like myself who entered the room, quickly noticed the black tar and the strong odor and became immediately disinterested in the room and its contents. Although the odor was so foul that some immediately exited the area, some appeared not to notice the stench or simply ignored it, instead choosing to remain, as something in the room had captured their interest. I felt a sense of danger, dread, and disgust and made my way to the exit. Shockingly, most of those who accompanied me refused to leave, but rather expressed interest in remaining. I departed through the only exit within the room, an open doorless exit that was clear from across the room. Upon exiting the first room, I immediately entered a second room. It was like the first, but was filthier, filled with decay and corruption. The black tar seemed to cover most things within the room, as it also covered areas of the walls. This room also had someone who seemed in charge, an overseer, who stood motionless in the shadows but intensely staring at all who entered. It soon became apparent that simply walking through each room, one would eventually interact with or become stained with the black corrupting ooze. Simply showing the slightest interest and touching any object in the room would leave one's hands covered in the filth, which acted like tar. It could not be removed, and any attempt to get it off or free yourself from it resulted in spreading it further over your body or white robe. As I looked closer at the individual overseer, watching from the shadows, I sensed a great hatred and a feeling of threat and danger from him. It was then that I realized that the overseers who were present in each room were not old men, but rather demons. Each is responsible for a particular area or room. They were emotionless, but stared with black eyes and an intense hatred at all those entering the room. Most entering the room paid them little notice, but instead either focused on the contents of the room or slowly exited with seemingly no awareness of the danger. Each room that I would walk through was a particular sin, over which had a dedicated demon who was responsible for its management. It was their job to create and maintain the elements within the room, ensuring that they would appeal to those entering. While each demon hoped to entrap and ensnare people into sin and corruption, each was powerless to interfere or prevent anyone from leaving any room at any time. I had entered with a group, but now various rooms had claimed one or more of my traveling companions who remained behind. I was alone now, walking through what seemed a never-ending, interconnected labyrinth of rooms. I progressed through many rooms. Some rooms were clearly destructive and filthy, while others seemed less menacing and perhaps only dirty. However, upon closer examination, one would realize that the same black tar and corruption was present in each room. Most rooms were quite difficult to travel through untouched by the corruption of sin. Simply walking through them resulted in my robes becoming stained. In some rooms, even the floors were covered with pools of the filthy blackness, the black stain of sin from those perishing within. Looking down at my feet, I tried to avoid the larger and clearly foul pools of black tar, but it proved impossible. Even my best effort proved insufficient as corruption covered my feet and began to splash on my ankles and lower robe. Some rooms and sins appeared very crowded, while others had attracted and ensnared only a few people. Those areas of sin, which appeared very crowded, had multiple demons overseeing them. While some rooms were more crowded than others, each room had ensnared individuals who willingly chose to remain within them. Those who remained in the rooms seemed unaware that contact with the filthy black tar not only stained their robes, but brought a price in the form of pain, suffering, and anguish. Those who remained began to show signs of physical wounds and decay on their bodies. In one room, there was a group of individuals standing together in a circle fixated on a demon, which stood in front of them. Unable to see what their interest was focused on, I approached and looked over their shoulders. Each was covered with black ooze to varying degrees and clearly in suffering. Each was intently focused not on the room or its contents, but instead on the demon standing in front of them. Some individuals stood unnervingly close, almost touching the demon. Individuals had varying amounts of black ooze on them, depending on how long they had chosen to remain in the sin and the items they chose to partake in. It was clear that some had completely given themselves over to a particular corruption and sin. In addition to being almost completely covered in black filth, they also experienced various forms of bodily decay. For those who had completely given themselves over to a particular sin, were shown as freely choosing to lay down on the floors. Floors which were littered with individuals covered in black tar, all suffering and in various states of bodily decay and corruption. One large room was very crowded, with many individuals and 3 demons present. The room was one of the worst. Decay and filth was all around me. The walls and ceiling dripped with thick black filth, as did the tables and items within the room. There were pools of decay on the ground, which I tried my best to avoid, but my feet had become covered in filth. Simply walking through the pools had resulted in the lower parts of my robe also becoming stained with black filth. While in the room, I had briefly touched an object and quickly noticed that now my hand was covered by the black filthy tar. Seeing the filth now on my hand brought a feeling of dread and disgust. I tried to clean myself off on the only clean thing within the room, my robe, but found that after wiping my hand on my robe, not only did filth remain on my hand, but now my robe's sleeve was now also covered in black tar. I felt great loss and despair at the condition of my robe at this point, which had become spotted and covered with black filth. I continued to walk until I came to a large open room with no items within it. It appeared safer than the other rooms, filthy but open, with no apparent items to attract one's attention within. Appearing filthy but open, I continued to walk through it without obstacles or hindrances. It was only when I approached the middle of the room that I noticed that I was walking through filthy ankle-deep black tar. In my attempt to simply pass through this safe room, my robe had become covered with black filth. As I looked about, I didn't see a demon overseer present within the room. Covered in yet more black filth, I walked toward the exit, clearly in view at the other side of the room. It was then that I noticed the demon standing just to the side of the exit. He glared at me, hoping that I would remain. He clearly hated me and wished to destroy me. But he couldn't, nor could he interfere with me leaving the room. He only seemed to position himself at the exit in order to induce fear in me. He stood still, never taking his eyes off me. I walked within a breath of him as I exited the room. The room seemed to go on forever, changing in shape and duration, and some requiring more navigating than others to exit without touching anything of corruption. After some time, I grew sad and wept at the conditions of my robes and how filthy they had become. While I believed that I had led a good life, I was covered with the stains of many sins. I grieved at the filth and decay that had accumulated on my robes over my life. I had now entered a long, dark, and dimly lit narrow hallway. It was tight, and I found myself with many others traveling toward the obvious exit up ahead. Although far off, I could see the arch-shaped exit that shed a bright light through the hallway. Those with me all had stains on their robes as well, some worse than others, but all well-stained. Most remained in the hallway, and seemed focused instead on touching the filthy walls and getting blocked by the various obstructions that made the hallway narrow. The obstructions appeared to be obstacles that those within the hallway were unwilling to simply walk around, rather than insurmountable barriers. It appeared that they did not truly seek the light at the end of the hallway, but instead stopped short on their journey, deciding to remain in various parts of the hallway, never seeking to enter through the narrow gate. As I exited the hallway through the narrow gate, I felt a great joy and immediately breathed in the fresh, sweet air, no longer pestilence-filled. Then an overwhelming light showed all around me. The light was purifying my stained robe, burning off the black filth that had accumulated on my robes. My robes became a radiant white and gave off their own pure white light. The light that stood above me was good and loving, and embraced me as a father embraces a son. Friends, you can help us reach others in need and spread the word of God by sharing this message with friends and family who may need this blessing. Also, if you feel like you've been blessed by this message, please consider subscribing for more content and hitting the like button. May the grace and peace of our Lord Jesus Christ go with you all.